As ladies first, I would like to introduce our colleague, Dr. Corina Klesman. Dr. Corina Klesman is a director at the Energy, Sustainability and Infrastructure Department at Guidehouse. She's an expert on policy instruments and strategies for implementing the energy transition with a focus on the promotion and integration of renewable energies in the energy market and the market ramp-up of climate-friendly hydrogen. She has led numerous research and consulting projects on the design and evaluation of energy policy measures and frameworks. Today, Corina will present the regulatory needs, policies, support schemes in Europe to ramp up the hydrogen infrastructure and utilization. I would also like to introduce our colleague, Mr. Matthias Schimmel. Matthias is an associate director at Guidehouse, and he's an expert in industrial decarbonization, hydrogen, and energy cooperation. This includes the development of transportation roadmaps for energy-intensive industries and assessment of the role of hydrogen. He's going to present today the hydrogen role in energy transition from a global perspective, as well as the potential of cooperation with Europe in the MENA region, the mutual benefits of exporting and importing hydrogen. Last and not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Maged Mahmoud, and we are happy to invite from RECRE, the Regional Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. He's now at COP, so we are happy to bring some of the COP atmosphere in the session, and we are happy to invite him. The agenda the agenda consists of 4 main components. We start with the global perspective of hydrogen role in energy transition. Then we are going to move to the MENA perspective and the role of hydrogen in the new visions and renewable energy targets. And then we're going to speak about the framework conditions, the regulatory needs, the policies and the supporting schemes in Europe. And finally, we are going to wrap up this with clarifying the cooperation with Europe and the mutual benefits of exporting and importing hydrogen. Before we start, everyone is encouraged to use the Slido tool to post his or her questions. We will have 15-minute question answer session in the last session in our discussion today, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can. So we start with Mr. Matthias Schimmel discussing the global perspective of the role of hydrogen in energy transition. Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tarek, and warm welcome from my side here in sunny but cold Munich, both to Sharm-el-Sheikh and the rest of the world. So I'll start off with giving a global perspective. Please, next slide, please. Thank you. So indeed, hydrogen is a buzzword today, but it's also one of the cornerstones of global decarbonization. It is one of the elements that is needed to decarbonize our economies until 2050 and in line with the Paris Agreement. However, today, hydrogen is mainly used for the ammonia production to then produce fertilizers and in the refining of fossil fuel. And it is mostly produced from natural gas, which is, of course, a very emission-intensive process. So the current gray hydrogen, so there's different colors of hydrogen. Gray is the fossil one, green is the renewable one, and then there is blue, which is the middle ground. But today it's mainly gray hydrogen. But as said, hydrogen is an important building block of decarbonization. And we expect, in line also with the Paris Agreement, a significant growth of green hydrogen demand towards 2050. As you can see in the graph on the bottom right, depending on different scenarios, hydrogen demand will really accelerate in the coming 2 to 3 decades. So really quadrupling or even further. And we expect that the growth is we expect that the growth will mostly come from industry, but also from the power sector, transport sector, and the building sector. Next slide, please. So quickly want to discuss those new applications that I just mentioned, starting with the industry, where globally there is really much emphasis on using hydrogen in applications where today natural gas or other fossil energy carriers is used. One prominent example would be steel, where now you have coke and coal or natural gas, and that could be replaced in a new technology with hydrogen. So hydrogen direct reduction to produce green steel. That is certainly one of the most prominent examples. You can, of course, replace gray hydrogen, as mentioned previously, for the ammonia production with green. But there are also further applications for high temperature heat process, where today mostly natural gas is used, and then in the future, hydrogen can be used. In transport, it's mostly aviation, maritime shipping, and truck and buses. So those applications where direct electrification is challenging and you need a transport option that gives you a lot of range, whereas batteries are still limited by range. If you use hydrogen or hydrogen-based fuels, you have a much larger range, so that is particularly relevant for trucks and buses, but also in long-distance aviation and long-distance maritime shipping, there are limitations with direct electrification. So here, hydrogen can play a major role in decarbonizing those sectors. Then coming to the power sector, with increasing penetration of renewables, we need more backup, and we need more flexibility in terms of storage. And here, hydrogen can play a vital role, both for long-term storage. So instead of storing natural gas, which is currently the case across the globe, in salt tablets, for example, you could also store hydrogen underground and then use it as a flexibility source, seasonal flexibility. But there's also the option to use hydrogen as a short-term flexibility option, for example, in combined heat and power plants, which today use natural gas, but could also run on hydrogen in the future. Last but not least, the building sector. Again, a sector where natural gas is used for heating. Here, hydrogen could play a role, especially when it comes to district heating. And overall, it needs to be said that while hydrogen is important, we also need to look at the efficiency. When you convert renewable energy into hydrogen, there's efficiency losses. So first and foremost, direct electrification is, from an efficiency point of view, the most optimal solution, but there are areas where you can't electrify. So here, hydrogen would be a really good option. Next slide, please. Coming to the life cycle emissions. So this is really crucial also from a global perspective, that when looking at the different colors of hydrogen, we need to look at the life cycle emissions. So as said, we have gray hydrogen, which is fossil. We have blue hydrogen, which is fossil hydrogen with carbon capture. And then we have green hydrogen, which is produced from renewable electricity. And if you focus on the graph on the right-hand side, we see that if we use gray hydrogen, it is quite emission intensive because natural gas is used and you have a lot of process-related emissions. When we capture those emissions, so when we produce blue hydrogen, the emission intensity is already significantly reduced compared to gray hydrogen, but we still have some remaining emissions because we can't capture 100% of the emissions produced from blue hydrogen. So then the next step would be to switch to electrolysis-based hydrogen, but here it is critical to use renewable electricity. As you can see on the two bars on the very right, if we, for example, use electricity from a grid that has a grid CO2 intensity of 100 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour, we would end up with hydrogen that is more emission intensive than blue hydrogen. So it really is critical that when we produce hydrogen from electricity through electrolysis, that we use renewable electricity. Only then we can make the most out of the emission savings. Next slide, please. And then coming to the global strategies on hydrogen. So there we've seen over the years more and more countries publishing their own hydrogen strategies. There is the EU hydrogen strategy. Multiple countries of the European Union have published their strategy. Germany will now publish its revised strategy in the coming month. The US is, of course, very prominent with its Inflation Reduction Act and also the focus on hydrogen. We see Asian countries, Australia, publishing hydrogen strategies. So it's really a global movement now with the focus on renewable hydrogen. And then the final slide, please. And with these emergence of hydrogen strategies, we see also new alliances multiply, because on the one hand, there are countries that will need to import hydrogen because just the potential to produce it domestically is limited. Countries that have limited potential include Germany, but also Belgium, for example, Japan, South Korea. So those countries are now developing hydrogen corridors, hydrogen partnerships with potential exporters such as Chile, the Gulf countries, Namibia, Australia. So it's really now we see new trade routes emerging with the emergence of the hydrogen economy. And with that, I want to hand it back to Tarek.
Thank you, Matthias, for this nice global overview of hydrogen role in decarbonization and the global movement of strategies and alliances. This leads us to discuss the role of hydrogen from the MENA region perspective, its new visions and objectives, as well as also the renewable energy targets. For this, I hand the microphone to Dr. Maged Mahmoud from RICRI. Dr. Maged, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Tarek, and I hope you can hear me clearly. Greeting from the COP, where intensive discussions are underway for a better future for the entire global system. If you can put the slide on the screen, it would be great. So we are going to speak about hydrogen in the MENA region, and in fact, hydrogen is not new to the region. Since the 1960s, 1960, green hydrogen was produced in Egypt, and it was in fact green because it was using hydropower from the high dam. Unfortunately, in 2019, because of the abundance of natural gas in Egypt, it was switched to, I would say, not even blue hydrogen, but gray hydrogen relying on natural gas. Next slide, please. Now we are seeing again the revival of green hydrogen in the region, and we are seeing a lot of plans all over the region, and we are seeing that, for example, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Oman, Qatar, Jordan, Mauritania, and many other MENA countries are adopting strong plans to be market leaders in green hydrogen. And this is, in fact, a good sign, because they are looking to, in fact, increase their ability to export green electricity through green molecules and green products. So they are looking for decarbonizing sectors which were often difficult to decarbonize, such as ammonia, for example, and steel, etc. So this is a trend toward Power to X that we are noticing all over the region. Next, please. So would green hydrogen promise a success story in the MENA region, similar to RE or better? We know that for the renewable energy, the MENA region is offering some of the lowest electricity prices when it comes to renewable, particularly solar and wind technologies. And now we have, for example, for the solar technology, less than 1.1 cents, 1.04 exactly in Saudi Arabia, for example, 2 cents in Egypt, and 3 to 4 cents in other countries. So what we are seeing now is the low prices achieved are achieved in all over the region, all over the MENA region, when it comes to electricity, the renewable electricity, which is an important element of the entire green hydrogen production value chain. And here we have the potential for renewables. We have also available low-cost land. In fact, also especially in the Gulf countries, we have low-cost capital. In other countries like Morocco and Egypt, we have successful business models for public-private partnerships, concessional finance, etc. So also there is the potential for export stimulated by the Green Deal and the ambitions of the European Union and the European Commission to import green hydrogen from MENA region. And these are sizable, in fact, in terms of quantities that would allow for gigawatt projects to be established over the region. Adding to that, new jobs to be created, and this is part of the social economic aspect that the region pay attention to over the coming years. So we are saying that green hydrogen is positioned to be a success story in the MENA region. Next, please. But we have some challenges, and I would say concerns that if we are not able to address, we might face some issues in the near future. So in order to build the way for the economy of the scale in the green hydrogen market in the MENA region, and the Arab countries in particular, we need to look into some issues. For example, the domestic market and how this can play a role in reaching the critical, I would say, mass to have a larger market for green hydrogen. And here we are seeing that most of the exported materials and equipment, etc., from the Arab region would be subject to the carbon adjustment taxation mechanism. And this future scheme, which is not very much far in the future, but it is near future, to have carbon taxation for products coming into the Commission, would cut the profit from export for oil, steel, wood pulp to a certain extent, estimated at 10 to 65%. And in fact, we need to be ready for that. So the local market of green hydrogen is one of the, I would say, the driver that should be made, that should be kept in mind while we are looking into hydrogen future in the region. We are looking into different options, but we also have some issues related to water scarcity in some regions. Although this is not huge in the overall business case in terms of the cost, it's only 2% or less because of the desalination of water, for example. But again, the water scarcity is a challenge in the region, and freshwater access may become an issue for the region. Okay, we can act on that, but we need to keep an eye on what is happening. And while we are looking into that, we need also to look into the situation of the transitional phases, how blue hydrogen would work in terms of competition with green hydrogen. And we don't want to see this sort of competition. We'd like to have coexistence in the market for the transitional phase, and then green hydrogen should prevail. And this would require some sort of collaboration to create the clean hydrogen economy in the region. And this we are noticing, this is happening now, for example, in Egypt, when they are drafting their clean hydrogen, strategy now. It is not green, but clean, so that they are putting blue hydrogen as part of the equation. So we need to think about that also. Another challenge is the regulations, and regulations pose a threat. In fact, if it comes to not only regulation, but I would say also permits and the entire ecosystem for the regulatory and the institutional framework. And we need to work closely on this direction to harmonize it all over the region and to ensure that we are having a good market to operate and that encouraging investors to be welcomed in the region. So these are some of the challenges that we need to look into, and especially that the markets are still being shaped, and they are mostly relying on bilateral agreements during this period. And we assume this would continue for a few years to come, even up to 10 years. But we need to be ready with certain regulatory frameworks, institutional frameworks, and also motivate partnerships on the demand side and also in the supply side from our member states. And again, here when we are sorry. Hello? Sorry. Can you hear me?
We are able to hear you.
Sorry for that. The bit connection is not that good. So if we go into the next slide, so now we need to work more on different aspects, creating sufficient demand to ensure that we are growing at the scale that we are creating good markets for hydrogen all over the region, harmonizing all over the region the frameworks, the contractual setups, and so on as much as we can, ensuring that also we are addressing different markets. And there are several markets of priority, for example, ammonia market, steel, and so on. So addressing the right markets and also keeping all options open. When it comes, for example, to sustainable aviation fuel or shipping fuel, which we are seeing that some of the economic zones over the region are addressing this sort of alternative fuels through green hydrogen. So we need to keep all options open, keeping an eye also on the electrolyzer technology and how this will develop in the near future, and then making sure that we are reaching the best economic fit for purpose business case for the region. Thank you very much. I assume that I have concluded with that, and I'm here with you for the funding sections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maged, for the overview of the hydrogen role in the MENA region, the potential and the challenges which are worth to consider when it comes to the large-scale deployment of hydrogen in the region. I would like to remind everyone to post your questions on the Slido tool, so we have the chance for later discussion when we finish our presentations. The discussion on the MENA region leads us also to the next question about the framework conditions and the regulatory needs that we foresee necessary to be implemented for the deployment of hydrogen in Europe. For this, Dr. Corina Klasman is going to introduce and present this topic as part of our agenda. Corina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tarek. I don't see the slides yet. Are they on? There they are. Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, we've already heard the importance of hydrogen, or specifically green hydrogen, for decarbonization and the need to create hydrogen markets. What we see is that that won't happen without a regulatory framework and also without initial incentive schemes, because the initial costs for green and low carbon hydrogen are higher than existing solutions. And so particularly for green hydrogen, additional investments are needed. What we see in Europe at the moment is that Europe does expect to be a major market for hydrogen, and a regulatory framework is built up, and also support schemes are proposed. But it is a process that takes several years. So I'll present to you in a moment the main European legislative initiatives on the table, but you also know that as always in Europe, I mean, there's the member states, and they also have their own initiatives that need to be aligned with the European level. So to be honest, at the moment, it's still a bit complicated picture. So bits and pieces, and I think what we'll see, or hopefully see in the coming years, is that a market will emerge, and also the framework will be aligned. And I think that's also why there's a European proposal. But what complicates the picture at the moment is that there are so many different initiatives, and everything is still evolving. But yeah, I'll try to explain to you on how things are evolving at the moment. Next slide, please. So what can we say about the emerging hydrogen and policy and regulation in Europe? One thing is that there is, first of all, strong focus on green hydrogen, and a pull for green hydrogen is created by several legislative proposals. And I think the most relevant ones are the Renewable Energy Directive that was already proposed in 2021, and now reinforced by the Repower EU plan in 2022. And you can expect that the negotiations around those proposals will be finalized in 2023. Yeah, maybe let's start with that one. What's on the table as proposal? There is a 2030 target for green hydrogen, and so that's supposed to be 10 million tons of green hydrogen imports. So from other regions, like for example, the MENA region to Europe, and 10 million tons of domestic production within Europe, which also means that the production potentials won't be necessarily where the demand for green hydrogen will be, so also the need for infrastructure development, but I'll come to that later. So this is the overall target and how much shall be produced, but there's also targets for the use of green hydrogen, and the one is in industry. The exact number is, of course, still under negotiations, but it's pretty certain or likely that there will be a target for green hydrogen use in industry. And the proposal is that 50% of the hydrogen that is used in industry shall come from green hydrogen. So that would be quite ambitious. There's also quota in the transport sector. So that next to other renewable and low carbon fuels, there would be a specific share of hydrogen-based fuels, so-called renewable fuels of non-biological origin, that would be used in transport. And there's also a quota for sustainable aviation fuels where those could be used. Of course, there's also not only measures on the demand side, but also funding available to actually build up hydrogen production and also to decarbonize industry processes and invest in the change of processes. But I'll get to that in a moment. I think another very important element of the proposed regulatory framework, and that's actually part of the mostly of the hydrogen and low carbon gas package, but also partly of the renewable energy directive, are standards for low carbon and green hydrogen. So because we talk a lot about hydrogen, but actually what is hydrogen and when is it low carbon and when is it green? I mean, that's an important question, and there's actually a fierce debate around it. How strict do these criteria need to be? And I mean, once the criteria are defined, they will be transferred into certification system, and these certification systems then will also apply both to hydrogen produced domestically in Europe, but also to imports, for example, from the MENA region to Europe. So everybody would have to meet those standards for hydrogen to be able to count it as renewable hydrogen or as low carbon hydrogen. As I said, this is really one of the key areas under debate. In terms of greenhouse gas footprint, the proposed maximum carbon intensity is 28.2 grams CO2 per megajoule, or that is 3.4 kilograms CO2 per kilogram hydrogen. That might change, but just to give you an idea that it's quite relatively ambitious and a similar range as what, for example, you see in the US in the most ambitious category of the Inflation Reduction Act. And there's also criteria for renewable hydrogen, so green hydrogen. basically there it says in the Renewable Energy Directive that the renewable energy used to produce hydrogen should come from new, so-called additional renewables installations to make sure that renewables are not cannibalized for renewables production, and that there should be a temporal correlation between the renewable production and the hydrogen production, and also a geographic proximity. How these criteria are spelled out is still more or less a big fight, so I won't go into the details. Try to get independent of Russian gas imports after the start of the Ukraine war. And Repower EU is not only about hydrogen, but it's also about increasing renewables production, saving energy, diversifying EU energy supplies, and creating smart investments into decarbonization. But there's also like many elements that are relevant for hydrogen. So already mentioned the target of 10 megatons of domestic production and 10 megawatts of hydrogen imports. But there's also different elements around building up hydrogen regulation and additional funding schemes available. But let me go to the next slide. The major package for actually defining the market conditions and regulation for hydrogen networks are the hydrogen and low carbon the hydrogen and decarbonized gas market package proposed, again, not yet final, but under negotiation. So basically, what they do is revise the existing gas regulation and gas directive, and introduce a specific regulation and market conditions for hydrogen. So that is in particular low carbon hydrogen and also green hydrogen. It's a quite big package. So again, can't go into all the details, but there's a lot around separate regulatory frameworks for hydrogen networks. So the unbundling of production and transmission, the unbundling of fossil gas and hydrogen networks, regulatory network access, basically what are the conditions both for the network access to the gas grid and for the hydrogen grid, the empowerment of consumers and so on. So it's a big package, and I think too big to explain all the details here, but just to give you an idea that this is kind of the basis for setting hydrogen and low carbon and gas regulation. Next slide, please. As mentioned, there's also quite a few funding schemes that have been proposed. So as part of Repower EU, was identified that there is an additional investment need of around 210 billion euros in the next 5 years to phase out Russian fossil imports. So quite a sizable number. One strategy to raise that funds is to also use the funds that were made available through the Recovery and Resilience Facility, so the COVID recovery funds, and use them for their Repower EU targets. And of course, not all of that is hydrogen, so those funds can be used for renewables, for other initiatives. But just to show that there is a number of European funds that can be used to build up hydrogen markets and infrastructure. And by the way, on top of that, there is also substantial funding by a number of member states that have particular interest in hydrogen. So let's say Germany, I think, put aside 12 billion in their hydrogen strategy. The Netherlands are investing quite a lot, and others. So the major demand countries for hydrogen. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think what makes it a bit challenging is that, well, there's so many initiatives and really getting a feeling, well, how do all these different instruments play together? We actually, as Guidehouse, did a study with Agora Energiewende, already last year on what could be key elements of our regulatory architecture for hydrogen. And if you think about it, then it gets actually more simple, because basically you need, as a foundation, you need infrastructure of markets. So you need a regulatory basis. Then, because it's a new, not yet cost competitive technology, you do need support instruments, be it on the supply or on the demand side, and they need to, work together properly. You need to make sure that hydrogen is integrated into the overall energy system, and you need to make sure that it's produced sustainable, because otherwise it's not a decarbonization option. Thinking along those building blocks, we kind of identified what could be instruments to support green hydrogen on the different in those different building blocks, and some of those you actually also see now in the European landscape. So, for example, we have hydrogen supply contracts or double-sided auctions to bring together supply and demand of hydrogen. So there's in Germany, for example, the H2 Global scheme. There's the announcement of the European Hydrogen Bank, which would be kind of a purchase instrument for hydrogen on European level. On the demand side, we have carbon contracts for difference to, for example, change the process in the steel industry. As mentioned, there's quota for green hydrogen in transport and an overall target for industry. There is a different investment support funds and de-risking instruments like the EU Innovation Funds and the important projects of common interest. And of course, as the foundation would be the infrastructure and market regulation, which is largely described in the gas market package. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to close the overview on the European regulatory framework in the making, and hope I could shed some light on what's happening here. Over to Tarek.
Thank you, Corina, for this overview on the regulatory needs and supporting schemes in Europe. Very useful to learn about the gas market package and the supporting schemes and the available instruments. This will let us to wrap all this information together, putting the global and MENA perspectives together and these necessary policy frameworks to discuss the potential cooperation with Europe. For this, Matthias will explain to us, the mutual benefits of exporting and importing hydrogen. So, Matthias, the floor is yours.
Thank you again, Tarek. And indeed, I think we can dive right into it. So as especially Dr. Machet already explained, there is a huge potential in the MENA region for several reasons. One is, of course, a low cost of capital, low cost of land. So those are just a few examples, but also, of course, the incredibly cheap renewables. I think previously we mentioned the $1.2 cents or even lower for solar electricity. And we've tried to map different potential exporters to Europe on the graph on the right-hand side. depending both on both the costs, but also the energy policy framework in those potential exporting countries. And the further in the green zone a country is, the more potential we see from a European perspective in those countries. And we see that quite a lot of MENA countries are in the green bucket. So we see Morocco, we see Algeria, we see the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia. So those countries present quite a large potential to becoming one of the key exporters to Europe. But we also see other countries, of course, Australia, the US, Namibia. So, and then in Europe, of course, we have countries such as Norway, which is, of course, already well connected, as Spain, being a large producer within the EU. And in terms of timing, a lot of projects are already in the final decision stage. So the construction will start soon. So we expect first large-scale shipments of hydrogen or derivatives to be become operational as of 2025. So in 3 years from now. Next slides now. And here, as part of the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative, where we support European TSOs on drafting a visualization on how European hydrogen infrastructure map could look like. We've also identified that imports will be key. So especially the arrow that you see on the left-hand side, that will be the import corridor from Morocco through Spain to Central Europe. And another important corridor from the MENA region is identified as from Algeria to Tunisia, through Italy, again, to Central Europe. So we do have existing natural gas pipelines, which could be retrofitted to then transport low-cost hydrogen. And the current expectation is that some of these pipelines could already be used by the end of the decade. However, what is still missing is the technical feasibilities and, of course, the regulatory and the funding landscape to actually repurpose those pipelines. And then if we go along those lines on the map, there's a lot of off-takers already, not just in Central Europe. But for example, if we look at Italy, in the south, we have steel, for example, which could be a major off-taker. Further north, we have, of course, the large industry clusters in northern Italy, the same in Spain, where we see, again, large industry off-takers in the steel sector that could use low-cost hydrogen from the MENA region imported via repurposed pipelines. Next slide, please. So now focusing on the key benefits for both. So especially from the MENA region, there are multiple countries that heavily focus on oil and gas, and this is particularly relevant for the both countries. So hydrogen is really a lever to diversify and to also build new local value chains. And when we talk about partnerships, it's always important from especially a European side, not just to focus on imports of energy, but also on building up new value chains in MENA countries. I think that is very important. And there we can work together to build new future-proof value chains. So production of electrolyzers, for example, production of PV, to also provide jobs that are relevant, then also in a decarbonized environment. Of course, partnerships increase security of supply if we diversify from a supply side, but also from a demand side. Security of supply and security of demand goes up. But in order to realize those benefits, we need to cooperate on regulation. As Corina previously explained, there's a lot of dynamics on the EU side. Imports are critical, and their close cooperation is needed to not create additional obstacles, since there needs to be eventually a liquid market between both countries, especially if you want to import through pipelines. And then last but not least, closing with the priorities. So it's necessary to deepen the hydrogen cooperations, with MENA countries, and there are already some corporations in existence. The Dutch government has corporations, the German government has corporations with multiple countries in the region, Egypt, the UAE, Saudi. Then it's also important to cooperate with other net importers, not just the European importers, but also countries such as, for example, South Korea, Japan, which will be importers, to align and harmonize in standards and requirements. We, of course, need to extend the interconnection between MENA and Europe. I mentioned the existing pipelines, but of course, there needs to be more interconnection, so more pipelines, but also more transmission lines to leverage cheap renewables in the MENA region. And then, yeah, it's all about strengthening the dialogue, and then, of course, the funding and the regulatory landscape. So there needs to be, especially in the coming decade, there needs to be a funding, because as Corinna said, green hydrogen has a cost disadvantage compared to other energy carriers. So especially in the ramp-up phase of hydrogen, additional funding is needed and close cooperation is needed to align and harmonize. Thank you. With that, I want to hand it back to Tarek.
Thank you, Matthias, and thanks to Corinna and Maged for these presentations and discussions on the hydrogen role and its importance for both Europe and MENA regions. As we have only 12 minutes left, we are now heading to the questions and answers sessions, and we would like to encourage you to post your questions if you have any. The first question we have is to Corinna. What is the role of the member states in the process of defining the regulations for hydrogen? I mean, here the European Union member states. And what are the differences between by member states? Who is leading so far?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Well, first of all, I mean, in any European legislation, the member states are involved there's a co-decision process. So you have the European Parliament, where members of parliaments come from different countries, but then you also have the member states representatives, the European Council. That's also negotiating on the legislative proposals by the European Commission, and that's actually what's happening in the moment. So for most relevant legislations, it's already the trilogue between the Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission, and they all have to agree on one final legislation. That's also a bit why it takes quite a while to actually come up with a final regulation. You know, you wonder, like, oh, it has been on the table for so long. Why does it take so long? Well, that's the democratic process behind it. That is one thing, but of course, there's also, you can see different strategies in the European member states. So, yeah, I'm from Germany. For example, you can see that Germany will be one of the major importers of hydrogen in the future, because Germany has quite limited renewables potential, huge industry. So to decarbonize industry, they will need a lot of green hydrogen, and that partly will be imported either from European neighbors or from other parts of the world. So they are investing quite a bit in schemes like, I think on the one hand, carbon contracts for difference on the industry side, but also on more purchase-oriented schemes like H2 Global, which would, or in the energy partnerships with other countries, including those the MENA region. Then there's other countries that rather, aim to become hydrogen producers or green hydrogen producers, like Spain or Portugal or in Scandinavia. You see that Norway is it's not a member state, but it's still part of Europe, so it's playing an important role. Or you can see, for example, Denmark is investing heavily in joint offshore wind and hydrogen production in the North Sea. So I would say you see that some countries rather, try to build out their position as hydrogen producers. Others are rather hydrogen off-takers, and some are both. I mean, some demand for hydrogen will be there in all countries. And of course, you can also see some countries are more pioneering and some are a bit more reluctant or less convinced of it. But that's awesome.
Thanks, Corina. Fully understood. The same question would go also to the MENA region then. And this question goes to Maged. Which countries do you see are the most advanced in their thinking towards hydrogen in the MENA region, especially for, as you see from your position at RCRE? Dr. Maged, do you hear us?
Well, we are seeing several countries working a lot now, focusing on hydrogen. Yes, I hear. I'm sorry for the quality of the interconnection. It's getting crowded here at the club.
We hear you. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I'm sorry for that. Okay, we are seeing leadership being shaped now by Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Oman, Mauritania is also on the way. Several countries are having this aspiration to become a regional hub for hydrogen and exporting hydrogen and also other products coming from hydrogen to neighboring regions. And this is a good sign. And of course, there is a need to harmonize the efforts in this regard. What we are seeing also now, what we are working on, I would say, not seeing, we are working closely with the states and other partners, for example, a strategy for the region that we are trying to provide to the Arab region. And this is a track that we see important, and hopefully we would have some results soon to put to the public domain. Of course, it goes under consultations with the experts on the energy sector from all Arab countries, and it goes also into the political decision-making process through the Arab Ministerial Council of Electricity Ministers. But hopefully we'd have something soon on the table highlighting the commitment toward the hydrogen economy in the Arab region and in the MENA region in general, of course. The elements of the puzzle are there. In fact, keeping all options open is our pathway to have green hydrogen economy in the region. The challenges have been expressed well by the colleagues here and by Corina and Matthias, and I believe we have common interests and we have common challenges also, and there are many complementarities that we can offer to each other. And I would also build on the proximity to other developing markets. So it's not only hydrogen to support the. Of course, we are there to support, of course, the needs on the European side, but also we are expecting Europe to support us to achieve our goals with respect to upscaling the markets in our region, especially that we are somehow discussing green hydrogen without putting emphasis on the green component, renewable energy capacities that are need to be established to furnish these, to supply the electricity to us. So we need to move together in both tracks, and also we are seeing the region as also intermediator, as also a connector to the huge potential that is there in Africa. And we have not discussed probably the issue of liquefaction facilities and the possibilities that, for example, countries that are exporting natural gas right now would be able to export liquid hydrogen. And we are seeing discussions on this direction now happening all over the region, for example, in Egypt. What I'm saying that we have plenty of possibilities to synergize, to cooperate, to achieve our mutual interest and also to support the green development and contributing to the future, sustainable future for our globe, in fact. I hope I have answered you, Tarek.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Dr. Maged, for this answer. Quite clear that the potential is growing in the MENA region and specifically in North African countries. The third question is to Matthias. As you explained the potential cooperation between the two regions, how do you see the transport of hydrogen from MENA to Europe, and what are the trends in hydrogen transportation you see?
Thank you, Tarek. So it has to be said that hydrogen is a tricky molecule. So the energy density is quite low. It's only 1/4 of the density of methane, so natural gas. So by nature, it's complicated to transport. So I mentioned we can use existing pipelines from especially Morocco, but also Tunisia. So those would be one option, and it's one of the simplest options because studies show that it's possible to repurpose existing natural gas pipelines. Other options, however, include converting hydrogen further into ammonia, and global ammonia trade already exists. There, it's just a matter of building additional infrastructure. So ammonia is shipped, so you can either pressurize it or cool it down to -33. So that would be a viable option, and as said, it's already traded globally. And a lot of the projects, especially in the Gulf countries that are not connected to the pipeline, are per se ammonia projects that look at exporting ammonia. Another option is liquid organic hydrogen carriers that can also be used with existing infrastructure. More complex is liquefied hydrogen. So the liquefaction point of hydrogen is -250, even a bit below. So you need a lot of energy to cool it, and then the transport, you have to keep the temperature. So LNG is -163, it's already complex. Adding another or subtracting another 100 degrees is even more complex and energy intensive. So liquefied hydrogen may play a role, but there are many, many open questions. And so we really see ammonia and pipelines. LOHC is also promising technology. With liquid hydrogen, given the challenges that I've just explained, I'm not so sure. And given that we only have 1 minute left, I want to hand it back to you, Tarek. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Matthias, for this brief answer. Quite clear that there are a lot of potential carriers to transport hydrogen, in addition to, of course, the existing natural gas pipelines. Yeah, as our session is coming to an end, I would like to thank all the audiences and all participants in our session. Special thanks also to our speakers, Corina, Matthias, and Maged. And we are coming now to the end. We are happy to answer any remaining question you have on the platform of the EU side event. You can see our profiles and feel free to connect with us and ask questions whenever you have any. And then I would like to thank all of you, and until next time. Thank you.